The guys are ready, so let's hand over to Rob Rose, JB, PB and Aldrin, and get on with the show.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome back, gentlemen.
Hey, Rob.
People getting my name wrong in the last 7 days is painful. For those of you who are not regular listeners, being called Ron or Rond is far more frequent than I'd like. So a great note to start on, Phil. Thanks. Lovely to have you here. So we're back for our fortnightly pods, just keeping those casual through to hardcore fans up to date on all the big NFL news. And just when we were thinking the news might be a little thin on the ground, we are given a meaty topic to throw ourselves into, namely the news that for the second time in his career, and who knows, maybe not the last, still young enough to keep going, Rob Gronkowski has announced his retirement as an NFL player. I say as an NFL player because no doubt WWE and various reality TV shows will soon come a-calling. But for now, should we start with a bit of a chat about Big Rob, one of the most successful tight ends in NFL history, and then move on to the other stories that have caught our attention over the last few days. So if tradition says I'd normally go to Aldrin, Phil, it feels like you should kick this off with Gronk being a Super Bowl winner out of Tampa. What are your feelings that he's not back for one final hurrah with TB12?
Yeah, pretty gutted, to be honest, because I have just assumed that since Brady was coming back that Gronk would come back as well. I think I just assumed he didn't want to go to training camp or something like that and then would, magically sign afterwards. It looked like the Bucs were keeping salary space there to sign him up. It kind of felt like a done deal. And then just out of the blue today, he's retired. It was a nice Instagram post where he said that he grew up, he wanted to play for the Buccaneers. Like, he's a Florida boy, I think. Is he? I can't remember. But he grew up, dreaming of wanting to be a football player and playing for the Buccaneers, and he got to do that. So, obviously it was a nice note to end on. But yeah, I mean, it leaves a massive hole for us at tight end now. I'm pretty annoyed, to be honest, that he's done it before Munich. I mean, it would be great, touch wood, there's no injuries, that, we get to see all the superstars and Brady in Munich, but, it would have been amazing to see Gronk in person as well. So I'm pretty gutted that we're not being able to see him in Munich this year. But yeah, it leaves a massive hole in our lineup. We've now got Cam Brate and two rookies who were a fourth round pick and a sixth round pick. And if you look at the available tight ends that are still on the market, it's Eric Ebron, Jared Cook, Jimmy Graham, Kyle Rudolph, Demetrius Harris. If it was 2014, we might be, all right, we can pick someone up, but it's not a stellar 2022 list of available tight ends. So it's going to be interesting to see what we do at that position. But I mean, unbelievable career. Probably, I would say, arguably the greatest tight end of all time. First ballot Hall of Famer. Absolutely no doubt at all. But yeah, pretty gutted to see him not coming back, especially as I just bought another jersey, a Gronkowski jersey this summer. So that'll be retro already.
The oldens are the goldens, though, isn't it? You look like a true fan if you're... well, I mean, let's be fair, Phil, you're a fair weather fan anyway, weren't you? You supported the Bucs just in time for that Super Bowl win. It was perfectly timed. I like that comment you make about you not having it. If you, well, I mean, we'll have to argue it over a game of table tennis. The point you make, if it was 2014, you'd be picking from a number of Pro Bowlers, right? There's some interesting tight ends on that list, a number of them with kind of age against them, a few with durability issues. But do you not still believe that Tom Brady can make magic with almost anyone on the roster? Do you think the days of him elevating the talent around him, as he particularly did in New England, are gone? Because obviously no Gronk, no Antonio Brown. I mean, that would be a story if Antonio Brown heads back to Tampa Bay. Do you think all of a sudden that elite level pass catching rank is looking a little bit light?
No, not at all. I think, if you look at our top three receivers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin and Russell Gage, I think...
Godwin primarily a blocker though, Phil.
Yeah, he fills that tight end role.
You're hanging on to that. I don't know why. I think if you look at those, they're probably three wide receivers that any team in the league would want, to be honest. And I'd back them against any other, three wide receivers on any team. But Cam Brake's always been a dependable pair of hands as well. But Gronk is a game breaker, isn't he? And he's someone special. So I think it will definitely be a miss, the fact that he's not there. Arguably he's lost a step maybe from his prime, but he was still putting up big plays last year, until he broke his ribs. I think last year he had something like 55 catches and 6 touchdowns or something like that. He scored 2 touchdowns in our Super Bowl win. So he's still got it. And I think he'll be a big miss, but we've still got a great offense. So it's not all lost, but it's a shame, real shame.
So Aldrin, you don't have to go quite as heavy on the Buccaneers. You can look back into his Patriots archives as well. What are your thoughts as Gronk retires for the second and possibly last time?
I think technically, isn't it the third time he's retired? Do you remember that interview where he said he told the Patriots he was retiring to get out of a trade to the Detroit Lions and then rolled back on it internally after a week or two when they dropped the trade interest? So I think that's another great story.
Still a smart move.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, it was a great move, but I just think that's funny. Yeah, I mean, like Phil said, he was a game-breaking talent, wasn't he? I think throughout the Patriots kind of transcendent era, he was a massive part of that with Tom Brady. And I think he almost redefined the tight end position on his own, really, for a long period, because you had, I don't know, you had those one or two kind of Hall of Fame tight ends just before that kind of sprinkled in. But I think when you saw what Gronk could do, that big, that strong, that quick, that able to get down the field, it's kind of led the way for a lot more of these athletic pass-catching tight ends that do away with the old guard style of worrying about blocking too much. That was never really his game. I know he did a bit more of it in Tampa probably than he would have even liked. But that was kind of the role that he had to fulfill. But I think just his ability to be that true mismatch in the middle of the field up against a linebacker or whoever you had to cover him, it was just an upsetting mismatch for anyone. And I think the relationship that he had with Brady was probably second to none. I think in terms of, if I think of great pairings of quarterbacks and wide receivers or tight end, there aren't really many or any better than that. I guess that trust that they had in each other, Brady would make passes and trust that Gronk would make that catch up against 2 or 3 men in coverage, or up in, looking for space and trusting that Gronk would be at his mark. And yeah, I just think that relationship was so crucial to, I guess the Bucs getting to and winning another Super Bowl as well. But, I think if you're honest, the only reason that Gronk came back the first time was because Tom Brady was in Tampa and called him and said, let's go have fun again. So yeah, I just think what a phenomenal talent. And I mean, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer shoe-in, isn't he, whenever he decides to do it. And I'm sure when they put a gold jacket on him, there'll be things getting spiked into the ground and beers aplenty. So that'll be a fun day to watch too.
Can you imagine if he picked up his bust? Hall of Fame bust.
I mean, but that he's got to do that, hasn't he? Surely that's like his thing.
It'd be a first. JB, memories of Rob Gronkowski.
I think it's very difficult to kind of add to anything that Phil and Aldrin have kind of said. I think they've covered the football element of Gronk quite well. And I get the point that Aldrin's going with. I think you have to put, at least for me, in my mind, you have to put Brady and Gronkowski up there with like Montana and Rice and Manning, and enter name of wide receiver here. That Dallas Clark,
Harrison.
Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, any number of the guys when he was at the Broncos all seem to have that click. And it's obviously, you can say that with some confidence when you're talking about Brady, but it's not like Gronk was a jobber. Like, we're talking about a large man, and it's very deceptive, because I remember noting this when we watched, whether it was Ted or Ted 2, when they go and prank Tom Brady, and Tom Brady stands up and you realize just how tall he actually is, because he's always surrounded by really, really large people. And I think you lose that with Gronk as well. You lose sight of the fact that he is massive, but yet like the toe tap catches that he could make, those like spinning, catching the ball with one hand, which is, again, easy when you've got massive bare hands. And it just, you see a lot with like Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce and things like that, but I don't think we're going to have a tight end connection like that for a very, very long time. And you can see why the two of them were very keen to link up back again in Tampa Bay. The big thing for me is an ESPN article. Now, admittedly, it's 7 years old now, because it was in 2015 that this was first said, but you have to assume that it's still true. When Rob Gronkowski explained that he has spent none of the money he has made on his NFL contracts. Everything he spends is money from endorsements and adverts and all of that kind of stuff. Rob Gronkowski, as a rough average, has made about $70 to $80 million from his NFL career. That guy is going to be like, I was going to say, this generation's Hugh Hefner. He's just going to be parties all the time. He's going to get a boat and he's just going to sail to wherever it's hot, and they're just going to have massive like parties. He is going to be hammered for the rest of his life.
Wow. I wasn't ready for a Hugh Hefner comparison, but I will say the 2 points you've made are the 2 points I would make. The first one is, it has to be incredibly special when you talk about two elite players in the same breath. And the comparison you made is exactly the comparison I'm going to make, that I think when you talk Montana and Rice, you've got Brady and Gronk. You know, they're kind of spoken about in the same breath. The fact that they've both done it, you know, we talked about Brady enough over the last year being a quarterback genuinely to move to another franchise and win, but basically win a Super Bowl as a starter. You know, as much as Peyton Manning did it, there felt something more dramatic, and you felt that the team was more on the shoulders of Brady in Tampa than maybe that Denver team was with Peyton Manning. But I think you're absolutely right that Brady Gronk connection will mean the two of them will always be spoken about together, probably for the rest of time, really, the mark they've had on the game. And the other thing, I mean, I wouldn't have said Hugh Hefner, but the other thing that you said I would agree with is that actually what Rob Gronkowski did is he really gave a different dimension to that Patriots team. You think about Bill Belichick and you think about the mechanical, ruthless nature of the way that he ran things, his deadpan, emotionless delivery to reporters, to any media, frankly. And you think about how different that New England team would have felt if it wouldn't have had these big personalities. No, I think Brady's part of that, you know, is great videos he puts out on social media, things like that, you know, always bring a smile. But I think actually Gronk was the real character. Gronk was the guy who was in this very professional, very rigorous, very challenging environment and just seemed to just lap it all up, just seemed to have the time of his life. I'm going to be the fourth person to say, undoubtedly, I mean, an absolute shoe-in for a first ballot Hall of Famer. And even if I don't think he's the best tight end of all time, and I don't, I think I have probably two or three ahead of him in my mind, he's without a doubt the most successful. And not only is he the most successful, we all know there are players who end up on the right team and end up with a Super Bowl ring. He has contributed to those 4 Super Bowl successes he's had with Brady over the years in massive moments in the postseason and the Super Bowls themselves. So, yeah, the game loses a star. And when you think about stars in the NFL, you know, you talked about endorsements, JB, you know, the people who end up on the Subway ads, the people who end up, you know, really going beyond the game. I think he's absolutely one of those. He's one of those people who, even if you're not a fan of the NFL, you've heard of Rob Gronkowski. And yeah, I mean, there was WWE before, wasn't there? And he's not a guy short of, pursuits. I wonder where we'll see him next. But the Club Dub Football Podcast salutes Rob Gronkowski, another one who goes a little too early. Go on, JB.
Oh, no, I was just doing a salute. But I will say, I think there is an awful lot of pressure on this year's rookie class because in the space of 2 weeks, we have said goodbye to Ryan Fitzpatrick and Rob Gronkowski, two people who make the NFL much, much more interesting.
So much more fun.
Yeah, can we just have like less people who are making us ask questions as to what are you doing, and more people that we can just be like, this guy's a laugh.
Joe Burrow had a bit of that though, didn't he? He's probably the one. I mean, I know he's no longer a rookie. What is this year 3?
Yeah.
But I mean, he started to have that bit of swag at press conferences, and yeah, we do though, don't we? Yeah, we need a few people to step up and really make the world of the NFL that little bit more fun and that little bit more interesting. So Rob Gronkowski, our really big news. Let's kind of go in and wrap around a few other bits of news. And from one guy who's leaving his job, an interesting thing that's popped up on news, both this side and the other side of the pond, is a guy who seems very greedily to have 2 jobs. So Devon Allen, rookie wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, why is he bothering? You've got to imagine being an elite level, world-class 110-meter hurdler, winning Diamond League meetings, no less, for mega money. I mean, it feels more like a career change might be in order for Devon than just a bit of money on the side, doesn't it? What were your thoughts? And is there an argument to say that maybe this guy should just walk away from a new logo at the Eagles as well? Is horrible, but walk away from the Philadelphia Eagles in favour of something a little more glitzy and glamorous?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because he only signed for the Eagles in April after he was at the Oregon Pro Day. And it is one of those things that you just think, well, why is he bothering? Because, I mean, the guy's an Olympian. Like, he came 4th in the Olympics. So it's not like he's short on talent or prospects in his already chosen field. And obviously that's where he focused at college. But
I'm by no means an expert on the economics of athletics, but I figure his earning potential is far greater in the NFL than it is, unless his name's Usain Bolt or Michael Johnson or...
Don't know, though. You win a fair amount for the Diamond League.
Leagues,
it's lucrative.
Diamond Leagues
like, if you win, it's where the money's at rather than like an Olympics.
And let's put this in perspective, because you can go, he's won a few Diamond Leagues. His personal best 110-meter hurdle time is 12.84 seconds, the 3rd fastest time in history for the event. So this guy's not like teetering around. This is a guy at 27 years of age looking at his 3rd Olympic cycle in his peak. And I mean, to win the Olympic gold, you're not going to be able to just do this in your spare time, are you? I mean, how many NFL players do you think would swap? Because, I mean, he's not wide receiver 1 in Philly, right? How many NFL players would swap an NFL career for a shot at Olympic gold or a world championship gold, something like that? I just want to, every time I watch him, because it happened once and I was like, oh, wow, he's done that. Then it happened again. And the more he keeps winning and the more his form seems to be on that upward trajectory. I mean, look, I love the Eagles, but surely he's got a bit of a decision to make here, right?
Just for your reference, Phil, you win $40,000 for a Diamond League win, and he's won 3 since the 12th of June. It's not bad.
But how many meetings are there in a year? So that's 120K, right?
Well, he's done 3 since the 12th of June. So,
all right, yeah.
I mean, it's all right.
He's doing all right.
It's better than me and you, isn't it? Run into the shops.
This is where Phil will tell us that after convincing us all he could be an NFL kicker, he could also be a 110-meter hurdler. You've got to
not be a 110-meter hurdler, but I still stand by the kicker comment.
I'd be impressed if Phil kicked it over a hurdle. Let alone.
I just love the fact that actually what he's trying to do is build credibility in the kicker statement by immediately dismissing the hurdling statement as if they're not both equally preposterous.
Ludicrous. I've focused on one. I'm not Devon Allen. I'm focusing on one career path.
Rob, are you telling me if you had the opportunity to kick 20 extra points, let's say, you couldn't, how many would you get out of 20? I know you're not as good an athlete as me, but let's,
I mean, we're going to get into this argument about kickers being proper football players in a bit if we're not careful, aren't we? I would say my basis for you and this is a maybe, right, we'll never know, making it as an elite NFL kicker comes from me watching you play association football, as we call it here in the UK, and not necessarily getting the sense that accuracy was where your strengths lay.
But height and power,
Just to give you a reference point, Phil. So one of the Bucks' highest draft picks of a kicker, Robert Aguayo, made 22 out of 31. And he did that his entire life and was considered the best. He was considered the best kicker available that year. And he
genuinely was. Is something like the most decorated kicker in college history or the most accurate kicker in college history. I can't remember which it was. But then he was it was a silly pick, second round, and there was just too much pressure. Top bloke though.
Washing cars now, isn't he? Or something like that?
No, I think he's like a financial advisor or something like that. He's got some sort of financial...
What you should do is convince people you should be drafted high, be rubbish at it, and then make loads of money.
Did you look at his field goals or his extra points?
That was his field goals.
Wait, I'm talking extra point.
that does limit your potential as a kicker, Phil.
I mean, if
the team
if someone in the NFL coaches like I play Madden, then you have no need for a field goal kicker or a punter.
I love the fact, like, if there's a 55-yarder to win the game, feels like I really just specialise at extra points. And actually the old extra points from the 15, that's where I want to be. It feels like we need to do a Club Dub podcast on tour where we'll probably have to go to a rugby field, right? But I'm sure we can work it out and see how many extra points, without even players running at you and trying to hurt you and block them, just standard from what would it be? You put it on a little T or something, don't you? Or maybe one of us can hold it. See how you do. Yeah, it feels like that needs to be a podcast while the weather is warm. Yeah. And just another thing before we move on from Devon Allen, hasn't played college football since 2016. I mean, I'm not here to...
He's 27 now, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm not here to tell him he should bail on the Eagles, but he should bail on the Eagles, right?
This is kind of the point that I was going to come to. We're talking about, is an NFL player, is he better off being in the Olympics? He is an Olympian that is trying to be an NFL player. That's kind of what this is. And if he wants to give it a go, good for him. Like,
you know what the thing is, though? I don't even think he's trying to be an NFL player. I think he was just in Oregon and went, I'll just run in a straight line really fast. And the Eagles, being the Eagles, and Howie Roseman went, he can be on special teams. And that was the end of that.
It's a very good Howie Roseman, that. I mean, they signed him to a 3-year deal, didn't they, the Eagles? I mean, he's not on a... Anyway, the Eagles side of this feels the less interesting part. But this is a guy who only caught 1 touchdown in his final year in college. No touchdowns the year before. But, yeah, Howie Roseman sees him run fast in a straight line. And
he said he's going to do both, though, didn't he? He said he was like, when athletics is on, I'll do athletics. And then when the NFL's on, I'll do NFL. I mean, I'd love to just have that confidence in your ability to be like the best in every sport. It's just like, I'll just do both. It'll be fine.
It is good fun. It is good. And other people, and Aldrin, I feel like I need to come to you for this breaking news of the last week or so. Not the only NFL player, or in the case of our next breaking news, former NFL player, to think a new career might be in order. Definitely at the detriment of the Indianapolis Colts. Tell us more.
Yeah, so Kari Willis has gone off to be a pastor and a missionary. 3 years into his NFL career, he's decided to step away and pursue another career along his faith. So it's interesting. I mean, it's a big loss for us, particularly, after the draft, when we're not necessarily set at the position. He was very much our starter. I think the only consolation, I guess, that we've got is we drafted a safety, Nick Cross, in the 3rd round. So you'd expect that he would be the guy to immediately step up and fulfill that role. I guess there are some safeties knocking around, aren't there? There is a couple. free agents. I think I'm not talking superstar names, but serviceable names that we could bring in to supplant Cross while he kind of gets up to speed and learns the game. But yeah, it's a big loss for us because it's immediately a first team starting player that's been really solid for us over the last 3 years that kind of steps away from the game and goes on to pursue his faith. So yeah, disappointing, but good for him. He's committed to that, taking that path. When I guess it would be easy to stick in the NFL and all of the accolades and the finance and all that kind of stuff that you can do in the NFL. So it's a hit for him, but obviously one that he's committed to pursuing. So good luck to him.
It kind of feels, and I know it's very, very different, but you do have these players in NFL history that have done it. I mean, as a Cardinals fan, I always think about, the Pat Tillman, he turned down again a lot of money. He was still a relatively young player early on in a very promising NFL career, and after 9/11, I think a lot of people in America, felt that calling. But I mean, yeah, it's one of those things that, it won't stay in the news for long, I suppose. These players, when they move away, those stories are pretty quickly forgotten. But it is an interesting contrast when you hear about some of the bad behavior, the really negative behavior that a lot of these role models in the NFL get up to, particularly in the off season, the types of trouble they sometimes find themselves in. It does feel very different to the kind of things you see on the normal NFL news cycle. So I think you're right. Safety-wise for the Colts, you can always find veteran help, can't you? So many cornerbacks kind of evolve into safeties towards the end of their career. There's normally people out there that you can pick up in free agency. And that was kind of where our little news roundup was going to take us next. It's normally the older players, the players past their best. You sometimes hear them called the greybeards. But with all of our teams, Cardinals being no exception, the Bucs now looking for a tight end. The Steelers, I think, will take any help they can get. Who's left on the free agency scrap heap that you think will find work very soon? We were talking about this off pod a little earlier. Should we whiz round our virtual room to wrap up our catch-up? Aldrin, free agency names you think deserve to get paid. As other people leave jobs, who do you think's on the verge of finding one?
I mean, the obvious one, I'm probably going to steal everybody's, but OBJ is the obvious one. And I think only on the heap at the minute, purely because of his injury. I kind of feel, and I guess we're all probably of the same opinion, that it feels like he's bound for the Rams as soon as he's fit and healthy later in the year. I think it just seems to make sense. It's a marriage that worked out well for everybody. Probably one that they want to run back because the relationship with Stafford was strong. OBJ looked good again, looked capable again, but then ultimately succumbed to the same problems that have plagued him over the last 3 or 4 years of his career, which is injuries and ultimately not being available, not being on the field. But I think that one seems obvious. I guess the only other wide receiver that I kind of feel will get work is Julio Jones. I know that he really didn't show a lot last year in Tennessee, but I still feel like he's the kind of name and the kind of person that a needy team will call upon for, a veteran minimum to come in, supplant a team, add a red zone threat, and, maybe catch a handful of passes, a handful of touchdowns, and again, like he did in Tennessee, a very small handful of yards.
But before we go any further, just because I always get picked up on the fact that I get things wrong, like I was the guy who said Matt Stafford wasn't any good in LA and so on and so forth, can I just point out that I absolutely called Julio Jones being an utter waste of money for the Tennessee Titans? And I absolutely did not see any sense at all in what they paid. Your point on OBJ, I think, is spot on. I mean, there were all those people who were talking after the Super Bowl about if he'd have stayed healthy, he was looking like he could be a contender for, MVP, wasn't he? He'd not only been, quite bright in the playoffs, but had started that game so well. So yeah, the Rams.
I think they make it
sense.
an easier game if OBJ was on the field for longer.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it goes as close as it did.
I think the weird thing is that you go, Cooper Kupp occupies defenders, but I think they both occupy defenders really well. They both find spaces, and yeah, I'd quite like to see him back in LA. I think it's a good fit for him, and good to just think he has that kind of career. We were talking, a year and a half ago on this pod about how he might never get back, how that might never come round for him. But nice two to kick us off. Phil, who are your? Go on,
sorry,
Jamie.
Just before we get into Phil's picks. So last season, Julio Jones had in 10 games 31 receptions for 434 yards and 1 touchdown. I think we're aware. I have been a fan of Julio Jones before. Julio Jones is that team first player that you kind of really want, in that he was an absolute star, but never seemed to care if he got the ball or if he was the focal point of the offense, because the important thing was winning. So I am not saying any of this because I dislike Julio Jones. I just don't feel he can contribute anymore. So 31 receptions, 434 yards, 1 touchdown. Sandwich bet, Julio Jones does not exceed any of those stats this season.
Ooh.
Oh, I don't think he'll exceed those. I think you're right. And my point was that somebody will sign him. I don't think he'll play well.
Hold on. In a whole season, he'd only have to score 2 touchdowns to win that bet. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. I am this confident and / stupid to make that bet.
Right. I'm not a fan of... Actually, no, that's wrong. I was a real fan of Julio Jones for a very long time, but I felt the injuries were just such a factor. It was ridiculous paying big money for him is actually my issue. I would take that bet if he signed somewhere. I mean, if he plays next year, I'll take that bet. Obviously, I'm not going to pay you a sandwich for a guy who never joins an NFL team again. But if he gets picked up, even if he's released before the season starts, if he signs, I'll take that bet. 2 touchdowns doesn't feel in. And also he ended the season actually a lot better than he started it, but he did start it horrendously. Are you writing up a sandwich bet as I speak? Right.
I'll take that as well, if he signs.
Yeah, if he signs, I think 2 touchdowns doesn't feel beyond the realms. I mean, was it 31 receptions as well?
Yes, 31 receptions, 434 yards, 1 touchdown. If Julio Jones exceeds any of those stats, I will buy any takers a sandwich.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, I'm in. So there we go with, I mean, you can talk about names already mentioned, PB, but we're over to you. Who are the big names or the not big names you'd love to see in, what is it? Buccaneer orange? What's the color? Buccaneer red? I don't
know. Red and pewter.
Red and pewter. Not got a great ring to it, but fine. It's not like cardinal red, is it? But anyway, crack on. Who's there that looks of interest to Tampa Bay, do you think? Or anybody else?
I was looking at Greg Rosenthal's top 101 free agents of 2022, and only 16 of them are still available. And OBJ is obviously number 1, but the rest of them, there's no one that really catches my eye that I think, is a flashy player that I think, will get a decent deal somewhere. But then, so when Ndamukong Suh, I can't remember if we mentioned on pod or off pod, isn't going back to the Bucs since the signing of Akeem Hicks. And I think he was arguably our best defensive player in the loss against the Rams. He's the one that stripped the ball from Cam Akers, to get us the ball back to tie the game, right at the end of the game. I think he had a good performance. So I would have been happy to see him back. It's a shame to see him go, but I think he can still do a job for somebody somewhere, and he shows up in the big moments. But for me, the one that sticks out is Will Fuller, and I think Will Fuller obviously had a bit of a troubled season. He had I think was it a 6th game or a couple of games left of his PED suspension. Then he had a personal issue. I think he had a broken finger as well that impacted him. But if I think of how he performed at the Texans the season before, I think there's a player still there. Like, he's got pace, he's a speedy guy. And if he can beat the corner, and get down there, then he's going to get yards and he's going to get touchdowns. So I think for a team who look light on receivers, I think there's a good shout for him to catch on somewhere. He's not exactly old either. I think he's 28. He's not, by no means is he, mid-30s kind of washed up, coming to the end of his career. I mean, 28 is still, fairly young age for a wide receiver. So for me, I think he's got a good shot. If he can put probably the last season behind him and catch on with somewhere that, is a good environment for him, then I think he could put up some good numbers this year.
I like that shout, particularly because there's such, now contracts have gone crazy at receiver, it feels like. There's not a great amount of value, and there's certainly not a great amount of dependable value. But I think you're right. I mean, we're not talking about a player who's lost all that speed. And I'm with you. I think for a needy team, he's in that, I don't know, B kind of, B plus kind of realm for me, where he's probably not a 1, but he's certainly a good 2. And for a team who really do have a hole there, you feel he could come in and put up some decent yards.
I think you are overestimating or overreaching if you're putting him at a 2. I think he would be a 3. The most games he has played in a season was his rookie year when he played 14. It's then been 10, 7, 11, 11, and 2. This is a guy who's quick. And again, we have watched games featuring the Texans where it feels like he is absolutely taking over the field. And a lot of that comes from what Phil's talked about in terms of getting past the corners, getting past kind of the deep set defensive backs and just picking up a long ball and going with it. He's got good hands. He's got good pace, assuming again, he's retained all of that, missed like last season with a broken thumb. So you would imagine that's not going to affect how quickly he runs, but you never know with these kinds of things. I think if a team's looking at him as a veteran minimum after training camp, then yeah, I think there's value in that. But I know no one is suggesting it, but I can't see him going for decent money.
No, the decent money gaps are all filled, aren't they, really? I mean, I was thinking, and I mean, the weird thing is, to Phil's point, I think the Texans or that type, I don't think he necessarily, fits a particular hole for a contender. I don't think he works in a Tampa Bay or an LA or even a Green Bay. But I do think where he's going to have a good amount of, ultimately a good amount of ball thrown his way, I still think he can. And also, you're talking about 11 games. See, there's only 16 games in a season. I mean, 11 games is a reasonable turnout. I'm not saying he's a first ballot Hall of Famer by any means, but I think he's a reasonable pickup for somebody.
Thing is, well, he's got speed, hasn't he? And that gets paid. Even underperforming players that haven't stayed super healthy.
Oh, if you can run as fast, made a fortune.
If you can run as fast as he can, then somebody will take a flyer on you because, heck, everybody wants a wide receiver that can run that quick.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, talking of teams with gaps after Tampa Bay, who takes your fancy for the Steelers, JB?
So I think the biggest problem that the Steelers had last year was they had a running back with a lot of potential and not a great offensive line in front of him. And I think we saw it in the Super Bowl with the Bengals. I think there is an offensive line issue for a lot of teams in the NFL. So Phil was kind of talking about the free agents still available list he was looking at and saying there's no one that really jumped off there. Well, there was one that jumped off there for me, and it is indeed a club dub favorite. We are bringing back, of course, our discussion of offensive tackle Eric Fisher. Had his worst season since his rookie year last year for the Colts. And I think some of that is going to be based around the fact that it was 8 months after tearing his Achilles that he tried to come back. And
he was rubbish.
You need to be mobile. Being an offensive lineman must be very, very tricky balancing act because you have to be both big and agile. And there are not a lot of people that can really fit that kind of bill. So having one having one or two on your line is good, but it's still not quite what you're looking for. I think after a year of getting back into football shape, a year of testing the leg and making sure that it can stand up to what it needs to, I think there's some potential there. Again, kind of like what I was saying about Will Fuller. I'm not saying this is a guy who should command millions on the open market, but if you need a left tackle, there are worse options out there that you go for. There are worse options starting on teams than Fisher. I think there is also a case that you could make for Dwayne Brown as well. When he moved from the Texans to the Seahawks, really helped stabilize that Seahawks line. You might not always be able to tell it because the Seahawks had bigger problems than that, but he added value to that team. 37, which isn't young for an NFL career, but we've just seen Andrew Whitworth retire, who was 41, and arguably was still performing quite well and could conceivably have come back for another year. So I don't think it's fair to rule him out. So I think there's a couple of offensive tackle players out there that you could get that could really help your team.
I think your point about Whitworth's absolutely right. He maybe wasn't at his absolute best, but he wasn't far off, was he? I mean, he feels like a huge loss to the Rams this off-season. I'll round out with a few, and only a quick one, and it's another one where age seems to be playing a part here. I'm going to pick Anthony Barr, formerly of the Minnesota Vikings, who's a 30-year-old linebacker. He is great against the pass, great against the rush. How often do you find people who are truly, great in both of those? And I know at 30, there seems to be this belief that his best years are behind him. I don't necessarily buy that. I think he's an on-field general. He's not the kind of player who only comes in for certain packages historically. He's an every down backer. And I just think it's really odd that you see these players, these kind of ebbs and flows of where money tends to go. We're seeing wide receivers get paid at the moment, but I'm still gobsmacked that, the Seahawks let Bobby Wagner walk, for example. For me, I think experienced linebackers, probably experience there, counts just as much as the kind of experience you're talking about on the lines, JB, and I'm amazed Anthony Barr is still about. Trey Flowers, I don't get either. This guy will only be just 29 when the season starts. I mean, an absolute elite level talent if he can stay healthy. And I mean, who can guarantee that you're ever going to be healthy through any NFL season? I mean, a couple of guys out there who I think could still play really big roles for their team. But yeah, Anthony Barr would definitely be my shout. I think, I don't know, I do wonder if the Cardinals are going to pay for releasing a number of experienced linebackers and kind of putting their faith in youth. Seems to be the fashionable way to go. But I think I used to talk to you guys a lot about the Kiko Alonsos of this world. I obviously made a pretty impassioned speech for Carlos Dansby a fortnight ago. Experienced linebackers who not only have to try and diagnose what's going on the offensive side for their own play, but when they're the kind of players that organise those around them. I mean, I just think they're difference makers. And at the moment, as a collective position group, the big names are getting big money, but I still think there's an awful lot of value there. So, hopefully for our casual fans, those are a few names. And I mean casual fans of the NFL, not obviously casual fans of this podcast. No such thing exists, right? It's hardcore. That's what we get from Nick when we get those. When we get those comments through there, he's definitely in that all or nothing vein. But I think there's an awful lot out there for NFL fans to still be excited about, particularly if the likes of Odell Beckham Jr. end up landing at your particular franchise. But gents, in a slow news swell that is this odd little pre-season phase, I think you've done a stunning job. I think you will have entertained the masses with your insight and input. And the plan, I think, unless anything seismic changes in the National Football League, is we'll be back again on our off-season rota in a fortnight's time. Does that sound the plan?
Yeah.
Always good to discuss these things live when recording. Right, I could have just made a more definitive statement. But yeah, listeners, you will catch us again in a fortnight's time. But gentlemen, thanks for your input. Another Gold Standard pod. See you in 14 days.
Thanks, Rob.
Cheers, Rob.
Anthony Barr would be thought better off if he wasn't on a defense being perpetually let down by their quarterback. Thanks a lot.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.